Welcome to Insight to Self. In this section, I'm going to talk about the dynamics of self-esteem, what happens to us as individuals, and what we need to do to turn it around so that we can reconnect with our authenticity and our most powerful, beautiful, capable selves. I want to talk about self-esteem for just a minute because there's a lot of misunderstandings about self-esteem. People tend to think that it's either that we have high self-esteem or low self-esteem, and I'm going to use that terminology as well, but I really want you to consider that we actually have access to our esteemed state, our authentic self, or we have blocked access to it. And so it's not really whether it's high or low because it actually doesn't ever go away. We just have less access to it from time to time. So I'm going to reveal that to you in a way that you'll be able to really see what I'm talking about. I also want you to consider that self-esteem is not all about me, 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 me. And that's one of the things I hear people say, even when I teach about the 6 essential life skills, which is one of the other sessions you'll be watching. When we are only focused on what's good for us, then it is a me, 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 me thing. But typically, we have in our mindfulness other people that we care about, other people that are on our target, other people that we want to be in relationship with. And when we have other people in mind, the choices we make align with them as well, and it becomes a mindfulness of what's good for me is also good for them. I've actually liked to describe or define self-esteem as having a knowing of my own authentic self and living in alignment with that. That living in alignment piece is what makes it good for other people as well. We also have a misunderstanding of self-esteem as thinking that it's global. I either have self-esteem or I don't have self-esteem. I either love myself or I don't love myself. And that is also not accurate in my observation. We may have high self-esteem or access to our self-esteem in the realm of our physical appearance and no access or low self-esteem in the area of our ability to create financial abundance. Or we may have a sense of esteem in our personal relationships, but not in our physical fitness. Or there's different areas where we may have a higher sense of esteem and a lower sense of esteem. So with that understanding, it's not right to say I have high self-esteem or low self-esteem because it's different in different places. Now, when I first got introduced to self-esteem, I went to a workshop with Jack Canfield, and he actually had us do an exercise. And at the time, I really didn't have any concept of self-esteem. I just was going to this workshop because I was a teacher, and it was part of the in-service training that my principal assigned me to go to. So here I am at this workshop, and I didn't really know what self-esteem was. And at that time, it was before Jack Canfield was the Chicken Soup for the Soul guy, or the Success Principles guy, or the Secret guy, or all the many, many things he's been involved with since. Back then, this was in the 80s, he was teaching teachers how to enhance their self-esteem. And he had us do an exercise where we looked into a mirrored image of ourselves and imagined that we were looking into our own eyes in our own mirrored image and tell ourselves that we love ourselves and accept ourselves just the way we are. And I went, whatever, okay. So I closed my eyes and I looked into my own mirrored image and I said, I love you and accept you just the way you are. And much to my surprise, my mirrored image rolled her eyes at me and she said, oh yeah, sure, right, you do. And it wasn't until that very painful moment that I really became mindful and aware that my self-esteem was struggling. And some might say, wow, that's a bummer. That's a bummer. My self-esteem, that's a painful thing to find out. I don't want to know that. But the truth is, when we know something, when we become aware of something, we have choices about what to do about it. And I suddenly, in that moment of self-observation, became aware of my choices of whether to continue believing the way I was and thinking the way I was and having all of my relationships and my workplace and everything impacted by my low sense of self, or I could take that mindfulness into effect and actually do something different on account of it. And that, thank God, is what I chose to do. I started studying self-esteem. I started studying what impacts relationships with ourselves and with others and how to become more authentic and more mindful of how we show up in the world. And so what I want to share with you are some of the principles and the concepts that I put into place to really reconnect with my sense of self, re-access my authenticity, and regain my sense of self-love and self-value, because it's critically important in the world. We've all heard things like we have to love ourselves before we can love somebody else, and we have to love ourselves before we'll believe anybody else loves us. And those are really true. And I really want to emphasize this. If I do not believe I'm lovable, I will not even be able to believe that somebody else loves me. And if I don't believe, it's just a core essence foundation to all relationships that we know our own value. So that when somebody says, I love you, we actually have some knowing of why that might actually be true, so that we can return and share that with them. I'll be explaining this more to you as the session goes on, though, so let me jump into the demonstration. So first of all, I want to have you consider that this glass is you. First and foremost, I want you watching this whole thing. This is Insight to Self, so I want you to watch this whole thing so that you're learning about yourself. But secondarily, I want you to imagine that this glass is your parents, your sweetheart, your children, your siblings, your coworkers, your boss, your employees, whoever you, or your students, whoever you may happen to be in relationship with, because we all have a vessel. Now, when we start out, and again, I want to back up and say one of my big passions is to unpack spiritual cliches or personal growth cliches. And one of the big ones is be who you really are. And you'll hear me say it again and again. You want to recalibrate, reconnect, connect with your authentic self, be who you really are. But I want to define and take a deeper look at what is that essence? What are the qualities of that? So I use Sprite to represent our authentic self because it's spirit spelled wrong. and it's bubbly and effervescent. So I want you to imagine, for starters, that we all start out as spirit or soul essence. And it's bubbly and effervescent and refreshing and pure. Now, what is this in reality? Obviously, this is Sprite, but it's symbolic and representative of our spirit self, our authentic self. So what are those qualities? And I always like to take that back to small children, because when you look at little kids, before they've been contaminated by the world, before they've reached about 4 or 5 years old, and examine what are the positive qualities of small children, all kinds of words and characteristics become obvious almost universally to all of us, pretty much internationally, with no barriers, no cultural change, no gender, no culture, no religious differences. The core essence of small children are things like they're energetic, they're playful, they're loving, they're accepting. They don't care what color you are or how tall you are or how much you weigh or what your age is. They don't care. They want to play with each other. They just want to enjoy. However, they're also discerning. So if somebody comes into their sandbox that doesn't feel safe, they'll pull back because they have an intuitive discernment. They're also incredibly courageous or risk takers. When you hang out with little kids, they'll see a tree and they want to climb it even though they don't know how they're going to get down. Or they want to jump in the ocean even though they don't know how to swim. They want to be engaged in life. And with that, they're also very physical. They love to dance, they love to climb, they love to play, they love to bike, they love to run, they skip. They're very physically connected to their bodies. Some of the other qualities that always come up are things like they're present to their emotions. And what I mean by that is if you have a child and they are happily playing with their toy or their bottle and they're content, they're showing their contentedness. But when they drop that bottle or their toy, they suddenly are unhappy. But then when you return it to them, they're happy again. They're very present in the moment with their emotions. If they're hungry, they cry. If they're satisfied, they're happy. They very quickly move from one emotion to the next, and they're not thinking about what something happened that yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. They're not thinking about when they dropped their bottle the day before. They're very much responding to and reacting to what's happening in the present moment with their emotions. Some of the other qualities of small children that are fun to look at is that they're very imaginative and creative. So if we were to put a child or two in this room with nothing but this table and this chair and a blanket, they would be able to create a fort and a castle and entertain themselves for hours with a very imaginative and rich experience that they create on their very own. Some of the other qualities of small children are that they're absolute learners. When you think about us as small children, we are soaking up all information. It's really as if the kids have a camera lens on their eyes and a storage mechanism in their brains, and they're looking out at the world trying to make sense of who they are and their place in the world, and they're trying to understand their surroundings. So they're literally walking around saying, what's that? What's that? How's that work? Why is that? And they want to know everything. They're just soaking up all that information. They're also full of awe and wonder, meaning that you find a little bug, they'll come up to you and go, look at this roly-poly, or wow, look at that rainbow. A puddle will fascinate them. They're very much full of that sense of magical gratitude, if you will. And then you think about, too, kids are very honest, and they'll say things that we might learn not to say. They just say what's on their mind. They ask what's on their mind, and they've got an amazing sense of humor. They're so funny, and they're just very quick to giggle and play and be delightful. So there's so many qualities of small children that are really, really awesome qualities that when we step back and say, okay, what are the qualities that I would like to embody if I were living in alignment with my most authentic self? Or perhaps it would be simpler for you to say, define somebody you know who you think is living in alignment with their authenticity and who has a strong sense of self-esteem. And make a list of those qualities. It wouldn't take you very long to start recognizing that they're very much the same ones. They're courageous, they're energetic, they're living in the present moment, they're physically mindful of their body, they're honest, they're discerning, and they're intuitive, they're accepting. All of those very similar qualities, and they're still learners. All of those qualities are very much the same between a small child and somebody who's living authentically in alignment with who they really are. One of the other words that I love to describe both realms with, both the child and the authentic self, is that sense of enthusiasm. And this is one of my favorite words because enthusiasm comes from the Latin words entheo, which means in God or in spirit. And I liken that to that bubbly effervescence that's enthusiastically bubbling up here. It's always trying to get our attention and bubbling its way up to the surface, sending us a moment of love and a moment of acceptance and a moment of peace and a moment of courageousness and a moment of the present moment, a moment of peacefulness and creativity and imagination and confidence. That spirit part of our being is always trying to wake us up and get us to pay attention. So when I talk about our authenticity, that's what I'm talking about, those qualities, and they don't ever go away. And a lot of times people think that when our self-esteem diminishes over time, that this core essence diminishes, but that's not the way I see it. What I see happening is that as we grow up, things happen that start to put an obstacle or a layer on top that blocks our access to our esteem. So this is rather rancid oil, and if you were here in person, I'd invite you to discover how rancid it actually is. But what this represents are the negative things that are said to us and done to us, and that we then also believe, that create an oily, mucky mess on top of this. So most of us can think of things that were either said in our own childhood or that we've heard said to other children, maybe in our neighborhood or our friends' homes, or even on television or in the market. We've all heard things said to kids that might put an oily, mucky belief system on top of their authentic self. So these are things that typically start from important people in our lives communicating to us things that indicate that we're not okay. They say things to us like, "You'll never amount to anything. I knew I couldn't count on you. What's that C doing on your report card? Children are to be seen and not heard. You're behaving just like your brother or your mother or your sister or your father in a negative way. You're stupid, you're dumb, you're ugly." We hear horrible things said to children that start out as you statements. Now the challenge here is that these things are said to us and we soak them up and we turn those you statements into a belief system. We start to question and adopt them as our own, and we turn that into I statements where we say, "I'm stupid, I'm dumb, I'm no good, I can't," and we add more oily muck to this mess. The problem is that these things come in as beliefs and they may or may not even be accurate. Sometimes this oily, mucky belief system even piles up from things that happen that we make meaning out of that may not be accurate at all. So for instance, mom and dad are in the kitchen having a financial discussion that's stressful and uncomfortable. The child comes home from school. They may say, "Quickly, go to your room." And the child doesn't understand the full dynamics, so they make meaning out of the circumstances and take in a belief system. I'm not lovable. Something's wrong with me. Mom and dad don't want me nearby. When nothing's further from the truth, mom and dad really just want to protect the child from this uncomfortable conversation. So in that case, the child takes in this belief system, soaks it up, stores it in their brain, and turns it into a belief system that they're not okay, that they're not lovable, that they're not wanted. And it's an interesting thing to watch how this oily, mucky layer develops, because it starts quite young. Some of us have decided that we can't spell, and we made that decision in first grade. Or we decided we're no good at art because our friend made a better horse than we did in third grade. Or we decide that we can't sing because we didn't compete well in elementary school in choir. There's so many things that we make up as a decision, and sometimes it's based on the truth of that moment, and sometimes it's based on just a story we're telling ourselves. But the problem is we store it as a belief. And as you'll hear me say elsewhere, just because you believe something doesn't mean it's true. And just because you don't believe something doesn't mean it isn't true. So it's really important that we recognize that these oily, mucky beliefs really have nothing to do with the truth. They do, however, have a lot to do with how we choose to behave. So if I believe I'm no good at singing, I will probably limit my opportunities to sing, or the way that I sing, or the places I sing, and I may not even seek out the ability to train or learn to sing better because of a belief system that I'm not good at it. So our beliefs impact our choices, which dictate what happens. So what happened for me when I was in elementary school is that I took on the belief system that I wasn't good at sports. Now, in truth, I wasn't particularly good at sports. But what wasn't true was that I couldn't become good at sports. But what would happen is I would go to school. The teacher, who also was not good at sports, says, okay, it's PE time. And she would pick this student and that student as the team captains because they were the best athletes. And then they would each pick the next best athlete and the next best athlete for their teams. And I was always last or second to last, depending on who else was at school that day, for the team. So immediately the message was said to me that I'm not good at sports. When I would get up to bat or kick or hit, my team would start yelling, easy out, easy out, easy out. But my name being Eve at that time was Evie, and they would often just change it and start saying and chanting, Evie out, Evie out, Evie out. And then I would get up to bat or kick, and I would do poorly, and I'd get back to the end of the line where I would sit and twiddle my thumbs until it was my turn to get humiliated again. So a couple things happened there. One is that I got reinforcement that I wasn't good at sports, so that added that oily, mucky layer in. And I took on the belief that I wasn't good at sports, but I never even tried to learn, and nobody tried to coach me. And I like to point this out because it may be true that we're not good at something in elementary school, but that doesn't mean that we have to stay not good at it. If we choose to study, practice, develop our skills, we certainly can. But I chose to believe that I wasn't good at sports and continued not to be good at sports. But one of the other belief systems that I adopted from that moment was the belief that team sports were painful. Consequently, when I went on into high school and I had the opportunity to choose the classes I took things like disco dancing and frisbee and stretching and anything I could take that required only one other person or no other person at all, because I didn't want to be humiliated publicly from being not being good at athletics. Then when I went on, I moved out of high school and into my life, and I moved to the beautiful island of Kauai, where I was living on the North Shore, working as a deckhand on a sightseeing boat, taking people up and down the Nepali coast, and it was absolutely one of my favorite times of my life. And I would look over and see these women in outrigger canoes paddling these outrigger canoes as a team. So there's 6 women in the canoe, and they're paddling in unison. And I thought, oh man, that looks like so much fun. I'd love to do that. And I said something to someone, I'd love to do that, but I'm not good at sports. And the other person said, you know, there's a coach, and the coach will teach you how to do this. But this was a whole new concept for me because I'd never really had anybody really teach me how to do any athletics other than, just some basics. So I went over to the canoe club and I talked to the coach, and he told me he could teach me how to move my body with the canoe instead of against it, which is a great metaphor for life. And he taught me how to paddle, and he coached me along the way. And it turned out I was good at it. And I ended up joining the team, getting into the competition, doing the state races. And then I decided to do the Molokai to Oahu race, which is a 40-mile race of relay where the women are paddling along and there's 6 other women in the water. They paddle right up next to them. These women jump up, grab the side of the canoe while these women jump out. They jump in, grab the paddle, and don't even miss a beat and keep paddling. And then the support vessel picks up the other ones and moves them ahead. And it's very precision and very intense and 40 miles. So I trained and trained and trained and trained for this. And I got really buff and really into it and really excited about it. And a couple days before the race, I put my back out. Now, I personally believe that my back went out because of the oily, mucky belief system that I wasn't really going to be good at this, that I was going to let my team down, and that I wasn't going to be capable. But you could argue that I put my back out because I just strained it from too much work, and I can buy that too. But how I know this oily, mucky belief system impacted me was that I chose not to try. Now, my chiropractor told me there was a chance my back would go out during the race, and there was a chance it wouldn't. And I could go ahead and try it and pull myself out of the race in the middle if it wasn't working for me. But I chose not to even try. And it's one of those things that I look back on and I regret that I didn't try. And I know that that decision was impacted by a belief system that I would let my team down, that I wouldn't be able to do it. And in fact, I let my team down and I wasn't able to do it because of that belief system. So I share that with you so that you can take a look within and ask yourself, what kind of beliefs did you come up with? What kind of decisions did you make as a child or anywhere along the way through your life that may have turned into limiting beliefs that impact your behavior and your choices now? Like I said before, it could be anything from a decision we make when we walk into an argument with mom and dad, or sometimes our parents divorce and we tell ourselves it was our fault when in fact it wasn't. Or sometimes it has to do with making a decision that we're never going to get the guy or the girl because of something that happened when your friend got the guy you had a crush on. I mean, it's really crazy, the little things that happen that we make big decisions about and then allow those to impact our lives. Even things like our sense of deservability about love, our capability about accomplishing things, all of that starts to get stored in this oily, mucky layer. Now, this is no fun, as you can well imagine, to have these negative thoughts bombarding you all the time. So I want to just point out that this sprite is who you really are. This oily, mucky layer is who you come to think you are. It's your belief system about yourself. In most of the situations, it's not accurate or based on accurate information. So then what we do, because this is such an uncomfortable thing, is we sprinkle glitter on top. And this sits right on the surface, looking very shiny and very pretty. Now what the glitter represents is who we want everybody else to think we are. Now this is a really interesting layer because we want to present something else to the world than this oily, mucky, wounded belief system. So what's the glitter represent? Often the glitter is things like having to have the nicest car, the nicest toys, the nicest jewelry, the nicest clothes, whatever. Not because you just love those things, which would be fine. If you just had nice things because you loved them, that's not a sign of self-esteem problem. But when you have all those nice things because you want everybody else to think you're okay or to think you've got it going on, then it's a false sense of self-esteem, if you will, or that ego mind trying to prove something to the rest of the world. It's trying to pull one over on everyone else, and often on yourself as well. Sometimes the glitter shows up there. Now again, there's nothing wrong with having wonderful things. It's just where you're doing it from. Are you doing it from just a joyful celebration or from this ego cover-up of this oily, mucky belief system? Sometimes the glitter layer shows up. I'll give you an example from my own life. I realized somewhere along the line that I used to smile all the time because if I smiled, you might like me. And so I would smile even when it wasn't congruent or authentically in alignment with what I was saying because I figured if I smiled, then you would like me and appreciate me and we could be friendly with each other. Now, there's nothing wrong with smiling, clearly, if it's authentic and it's truthful. But we've all known people who smile no matter what they're saying. They can smile when they're being mean, and they can smile when they don't mean it. And ultimately, it ends up pushing us away from them instead of pulling us in. And that self-observation of noticing that I was smiling when it didn't match my message or my mood or my authenticity allowed me to make a new choice to choose to smile when I mean it, so that it's truly genuine and connects me with other people. Now you look at too, the glitter layer might show up as being funny. Now I said one of the positive qualities of small children is that they're funny, and they truly are. And when we are authentically tapped into our humor, it's a beautiful, joyful expression. However, some people use humor as that glitter layer to protect them from other people, or they use sarcasm to keep people out. And they'll tell jokes till it pushes people away instead of pulling them in. I dated a guy once who used to tell jokes all the time, and in the beginning it was very endearing and one of the things I appreciated about him. But then down the line in our relationship, when we needed to talk about more important things and pretty serious things, and everything was batted away with a joke or sarcasm, it ended up causing huge problems in our relationship because we could never go deeper. And that humor was covering up a limiting belief system that was blocking both of us from being able to access a deeper truth of who we both were. I love to use teenagers as an example of the glitter layer because the glitter layer is a defense mechanism, and it's designed to protect us. And as I've said before, the ego mind's intention is to protect us. And so this glitter is there specifically to protect us. The problem is it tends to lead us in the wrong direction, and it gets us stuck in this mire instead of allowing us to go deeper into what we really want to create. So if you consider that the glitter layer with teenagers, you might see it with things like, I don't know. How'd your day go today? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. So if you use the I don't know, it deflects people's ability to criticize you if you didn't give the right answer, and it keeps people at bay. Another glitter layer you might see, especially with teenagers, but not specifically so, is I don't care. Whatever. I don't care. What do you want for dinner? I don't care. What do you want to do? I don't care. And if they just don't care, then it minimizes our ability to add more oily muck into their system. Only the truth is they do care. It's just a defense mechanism. Sometimes you see the glitter layer being things like being angry. I used to work with a teacher who would kind of grunt if you even walked in his room to talk to him, and he was very negative and just kind of pushed everybody away with this sense of being angry all the time. And it was very effective at keeping us all away from him so he could do whatever he wanted. The problem is that when we really needed to talk to him, nobody really wanted to. And also, we never got to bond with him or connect with him or create a deeper friendship because he always kept us at bay with this kind of gruff exterior. And you'll see that with teenagers as well. Sometimes you're walking down the street and you see a group of kids and they look mean and you want to cross the street because they're presenting this very protective, angry, sense of pushing you away, when underneath that it's usually because they've been hurt or they're afraid or something bad has happened to them, and underneath that is this amazingly beautiful being. The glitter layer also shows up as overt sexuality. Now, sensuality is an inherent part and a beautiful part of who we are as human beings. However, you'll see this particularly in teenage or young women where they overtly flaunt their sexuality. What they're really seeking is a sense of love and connection and intimacy with another person. What they get is attention for their sexuality, which is often met thereafter, not far behind, with a sense of rejection. And that causes more of this oily muck to go in place. And so it's actually not the authentic means of reaching what the goal is that they want. So it's an interesting thing to just watch how this glitter layer develops. Sometimes it's the story you tell yourself. One of the stories I used to say is, I don't know what I'm doing, as it related to my career. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. If I just kept saying that, then nobody could accuse me of doing it wrong or of not being more successful. And then one day I just simply practiced self-observation, and I heard myself say, I don't know what I'm doing. And when I looked at that, I realized it was absolutely not true. I actually do know what I'm doing, and that there was no more need for that story. So I want to show you something, and then I want to follow that with a story that'll really help illustrate this as well. I want you to notice, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but what I want you to notice that these bubbles are still coming up through the oil. And this is a really beautiful thing to recognize, because our spirit self is always trying to get our attention. It's sending up those bubbles, that moment of love, that moment of creativity, that moment of intuition, that moment of inspiration, that moment of courageousness. It's always sending us messages, but it's really important that we notice that and be able to capture those bubbles and allow them to wake us up. You know, it's an interesting thing to look at how this oily, mucky layer comes into being, and there's actually statistics about this, that in kindergarten it said that 80% of the kids have high self-esteem. 80% have access to this part of their being. And when you consider all of those qualities I said were before kids were age 4 or 5, that's right around the time they enter kindergarten, they have a pretty strong sense of this part of their being. Some of them have been contaminated with this oily, mucky mess already, but a lot of them have access to this. And when you ask a group of kindergartners a question, they will raise their hand, they will raise both hands, they'll climb up on top of the chairs trying to get called on, and they don't even know the answer necessarily. But that doesn't matter. They're engaged in the process, enthusiastic participants in life. By the time you get to 5th grade, they say that 20% of the kids have high self-esteem. It's completely flip-flopped. That means that 80% are operating out of that oily, mucky mess, and only 20% are accessing their authenticity. And when you ask a group of 5th graders a question, only 1 or 2 will raise their hand, and they only do so if they're pretty sure they know the right answer. When you get to high school, this particular statistic said that only 5% of the kids had high self-esteem. Now, I do a lot of work with teenagers, and I would venture to say that that statistic's not accurate, and it's an old statistic, so maybe it's changed. My belief is that the kids have only 5% self-esteem, only 5% have access to their self-esteem. They only have access to 5%. And that's what you see even with kids who are high achievers and student government people and all of those kids who are still even actively involved, and from the outside they look like they've got it going on. They're still hanging on by just a thread, because this oily, mucky layer has gotten so deep and so thick and so uncomfortable that they're just barely hanging on. And when you think about that, when you leave high school, and that was not just true for the kids outside of us, that's not just true for the kids in school today, that was also true for us as adults. So we leave that environment with totally diminished self-esteem, with severely limited access to our authentic self. And then we leave and we try to create our careers, our relationships, and our families, the things that are most important to us in the world as human beings for the most part, and we are completely diminished in our capability of doing so. So it's really important that we turn this around. But I love pointing out that it doesn't matter how deep that oil gets, no matter how thick it is, those bubbles are still popping up, and may that offer you some hope that our spirit self is still there, and we can turn this reality around. So I'm going to share with you a story that illustrates this, and it's a true story, so you can look it up on the internet, but there's a solid gold Buddha in Thailand. I believe it's in Bangkok, in the capital, and it's huge. It's like 5.5 tons of solid gold. And I believe it was in the 1700s, this solid gold Buddha was in the countryside of Thailand in a monastery, and the monks were doing their thing with this beautiful, amazing golden Buddha. And they heard that the Burmese soldiers were coming through the land and stealing and pillaging and raiding and melting down things of value, and they were devastatedly fearful that, oh my gosh, what will happen to our beautiful Buddha? These guys are surely going to see this as the value that it has, and they'll destroy it. So they put their heads together and said, what do? We can't move it. It's 5.5 tons of gold. That's 11,000 pounds. How can we do it? What can we do? And they realized that their only hope for saving their beautiful Buddha was to camouflage it. And so that's what they did. They covered the whole thing with clay. They put the details on it so it looked like an actual clay Buddha, and it worked great. The soldiers came through, they didn't recognize the Buddha as anything of value, and they moved on, but unfortunately they killed all the monks and all the villagers who knew that that was a solid gold Buddha before they left. So now here sits this beautiful solid clay Buddha in this, or perceived to be a solid clay Buddha in this monastery. Now new people come and populate the village, and new people come and populate the monastery, and they do their thing with a clay Buddha. And this goes on for centuries. And it was around 1950, 1952, somewhere in there, where they decided to move this ancient relic of this beautiful Buddha to Bangkok, to the capital, and they measured its height and its weight, or measured its height and its depth, and they estimated its weight, believing that it was made out of clay. And of course, clay is infinitely lighter than gold. So they hooked it up to a crane, went to lift it, and as they did, one of the straps broke, and the Buddha jarred a little bit. And as it did that, a piece of the clay broke off. Now, the workers were horrified, because this is like superstitious-wise, like breaking a mirror, and lots of bad luck for breaking an ancient relic. So they went over to investigate how bad their luck was. And when they did, they saw something shiny reflecting back at them. And they ended up chipping away the rest of the clay to reveal the solid gold Buddha, which I believe even to this day is the largest solid gold Buddha on the planet. Now, I love this story because to me it's very, very much akin to what we do with ourselves. We're born as Buddha essence, Christ essence, Spirit essence, Sprite essence, whatever you want to call it. We're born as the soul essence. And it's beautiful, and it's brilliant, and it's capable, and it's resourceful, and it's responsible, and it's enthusiastic, and it's all wise and intuitive and connected and creative and capable. The problem is that as we move through life, we start seeing things and encountering things that are a little bit dangerous, and we start trying to protect ourselves. And in so doing, we put on this oily, mucky, and glittery mess in an effort to protect ourselves. And then what happens is we fall asleep, and we simply forget that who we really are is this beautiful spirit essence. And we start believing that our beliefs are true, even though they may not be, or they don't need to continue to be. And we believe our glitter is just who we are. And we start operating that way as if we have no choice. So my invitation to you is to first start by looking at yourself and say, what are my glitter layers? What are the behaviors I do? How do I pretend to be, or who do I pretend to be? What do I do to fool the rest of the world, and maybe even fool myself? Sometimes we are pretending that we've got it all going on when we don't. Sometimes pretending that we don't know what we're doing when we really do. Sometimes we're smiling when we're not really happy. Sometimes we lie to people as an effort to keep them at distance. Sometimes we stay withdrawn as a protective layer. Just notice what it is you do. And I invite you to notice that as you self-observe through this process, you're not doing it to judge yourself. You're doing it to reveal yourself and your behaviors. Because once you self-observe and you see what you're doing, you suddenly realize you have choices. And when you have choices, you become powerful over what the outcome is. So it's very important that we notice what we do. And then take a deeper look. What are those oily, mucky, limiting beliefs that we hold on to that may or may not have any merit in the present reality of our lives? They may be things that we decided when we were 10 years old or 8 years old that has nothing to do with the truth now. So just look, what are those beliefs that you limit your choices on, or that you allow to guide your behavior with, that may not be serving you anymore? It's an opportunity to look at those and say, are these serving me? Are they moving me in the direction of my target? Are they moving me in the direction of where I want to go? Or are these beliefs actually impeding me on my path, or even sending me reeling in the opposite direction? So just take a look. And then what I really want to invite you to do, because this is the most fun, is to dive a little deeper and take a deeper look at who are you really? What are the qualities that you embody? What are the qualities that you embodied as a child and maybe want to reconnect with? What are the qualities that you wish people described you as? What are the qualities that you already inherently have? What do you like, love, admire, and appreciate about yourself? And here's what happens as you start to do this. Because most of the world will tell you, wow, in order to turn this around, you probably ought to go to counseling and really find out who is responsible for that belief system and why you do things the way you do and whose fault it was and how did that make you feel? And let's go over that problem again and let's retell that story again. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to counselors or therapists, because I think that there's a wonderful place for them in the world. However, it depends on how gifted they are. And if they're stuck in their own oily, mucky mess and haven't turned this around, they're only going to help you dig into your oily, mucky mess and not turn it around for you either. So you see what happens. If I just keep telling my story and I just keep going into this oily, mucky mess and reliving it and looking at whose fault it was and who was to blame and why. And I'm going to pull my finger out. Nothing has changed in that glass. It's stirred up. There's more emotion stirred, but nothing has changed in my reality. The problem is that now I have that oily, mucky mess on my present moment, and it goes back out, and it infects all my present-day emotions and all my present-day relationships with that oily, mucky mess of the past. That's called baggage. I invite you to go a little bit deeper and ask yourself, who am I really? And what are my positive qualities? And what you'll find automatically is that as you start doing that and you start saying, well, I think I'm a good person and a kind person and a loving person, automatically you'll start to see that some of that oily muck just starts getting replaced with your new awareness and growing a sense of who you really are. Sometimes just simply that self-observant behavior allows you to just automatically align more with that presence and that essence. The challenge is that that's the good news. Sometimes it just dissipates and goes away and you reconnect with your authenticity and your goodness. Sometimes it gets kind of loud coming out. And if you remember that the ego mind, this oil and this glitter were put here specifically to protect you, your ego's not going to be so quick to say, oh, okay, I'm just going to get out of the way and let you have at it, because it's trying to protect you. So it might start to reinforce what was in an effort to keep the status quo. So your ego mind will say things like, oh yeah, well, if you're such a good person, what about when you? And if you're such a kind person, what about the time when? And honest, oh my gosh, remember that lie you told? And your ego will start trying to regain its place because it believes that it's necessity, or that it is a necessity for protecting you. So it's important when that happens that we stop and look at what the ego mind is saying and consider it a hypothesis instead of the truth. Instead of just believing it and saying, oh, you're right, I'm a bad person, or I'm not an honest person, and just getting sucked into that belief system, the invitation is to go, I hear what you're saying, but it is now my knowing that I'm a good person and my intention to be a good person. So while I haven't always been, that's how I'm going to align from this moment forward. And when the ego sees that, it kind of backs off a little bit. It starts to go, well, okay, because you're taking charge of your own emotional state. So as you start looking at this and you hear that ego mind trying to take its place there, you want to take a deep breath and tell the ego that you got it. I'll give you a funny example of this. I was doing this very same demonstration in front of something like 500 people at a business conference. And while I'm doing it, I noticed that this man in the front row is falling asleep. And my ego sees this, and it makes meaning out of what it sees and makes a decision about why the guy's falling asleep. And it says to me, you're so boring. Now you can imagine if I took that on as a belief while I'm standing on stage in front of 500 people, what the result might be. I could stumble over my words, I could become incredibly boring, I could walk off stage, I could feel undeserving of being up there. If I walked around on that stage with the belief that I was boring, I would align with that belief and create havoc from there forth. So instead, what I've learned to do is to become self-observant and examine those beliefs. I take a look and I say, okay, well, thank you for sharing. I realize what you're doing is trying to protect me. So let's take a look around and see if this is true, that I'm boring. And I look around and nobody else is sleeping. So it may not be true that I'm boring. It still may be true, but it may not be true. So I could then take that information and say, well, I don't see anybody else sleeping, but it is after lunch. So I can use this information to change my behavior in a way that would lead toward the target of creating a dynamic exchange with my audience. I can do an exercise. I can move closer to the guy who's sleeping. I can tell a joke and get everybody laughing. I could have them talk to each other. There are behaviors that I can employ, strategies, if you will, for turning the situation around based on the theory that my ego has come up with, but by checking it out for accuracy and then doing something on account of it. So I like to encourage people, when you hear your ego mind saying something, say that is just a hypothesis. That I was boring was a hypothesis. May be true, may not be true, but I can do things to ensure that I'm not boring. It also might be true that this guy's from a different time zone and he's just tired and it has nothing to do with me at all. And there may not be anything I need to do about it in any case. And it may also be true that he's not feeling well, he should be in his room sleeping, but I'm so fascinating he doesn't want to leave. So I have choices about what I choose to believe. And what I want to just reinforce with people, if what we're telling ourselves and the belief that we have is just a story we're telling ourselves and we don't know what the truth is, why not tell a story that changes our behavior and leads us toward what we want to create instead of leading us toward what we don't want to create? It's in our power to decide what we choose to believe. So with this, what I want you to do is start looking deeper and look at what your good qualities are, what you like, love, admire, and appreciate about yourself, and start to grow those. And as you do, some of it will just automatically dissipate. Some of it will come out and painfully cause a little question in your heart, and you'll have to consciously say, no, I am a good person, and I'm a kind person, and I'm choosing to align with that part of myself. What will happen as you start telling yourself the good news about yourself and you start reinforcing your positive qualities, what will happen is you'll start hearing it and being able to receive it from other people. And this ties back into what I said at the very beginning. If we're not loving ourselves, we won't believe anybody else loves us. So for instance, if I walk out and I walk out of my bedroom in the morning and I think I'm having a terrible hair day and my husband goes, oh, Eve, your hair looks really cute, I'm not going to think he's right. I'm not going to just go, oh, thank you. Oh, great. I'm going to go, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I may still thank him, but I'm thinking he's wrong. Or if I say to you, I love that shirt you're wearing, and you're thinking, this old thing? Are you kidding? And if you don't like your shirt and I compliment it, you're not going to believe that I'm correct. You're going to dismiss me as incorrect because it doesn't match your previous belief system. And so as we start acknowledging the good news in ourselves and telling ourselves our positive qualities and reinforcing that, we'll start to be able to receive and even hear input that may have been there all along that we were simply batting away and dismissing because it didn't match our belief system. And then what happens, and this is the magical part, is that when we are telling ourselves the good news about ourselves and reinforcing our authentic soul essence, if you will, and we're hearing that reflected and reaffirmed by other people, when we are faced with two choices, we are far more likely to align our behavior with our authentic self and what we're trying to create than to align our behavior with our ego mind and what we don't want. So when I am faced with two choices, one is to do mean things, illegal things, steal, be disrespectful to others, and the other is to be kind and loving and caring toward others in my life. And I believe and have a knowing of myself as spirit, as authenticity. And I'm faced with these two choices. I am far more likely to align my behaviors with my authentic presence and move in this direction than I am to do this, because this would be painfully uncomfortable to me. And this is one of the things that's challenging about modern religion, if you will, is there's a common belief system that we are all sinners. And if we believe in our heart and our soul that who we are at our core essence is a sinner, rather than made in the image and likeness of God as spirit essence, if I believe I'm a sinner and I'm faced with two choices, and one is to do something sinful and one is to do something good, then it will be natural for me and excusable for me to do something sinful. If I know that I'm a divine being and I have these two choices, and it will become obviously the right path to take and the easy path to take to do something kind and loving in the world, because it would be painful to my soul to do something that harmed somebody else. There's another great story of this that reveals this, of a Native American child talking to his grandfather, elder, and the grandfather is explaining to him that there are two wolves within us, and these two wolves are fighting all the time. And he says one wolf is full of rage and envy and righteousness and greed and all of these behaviors that are unpleasant, and the other wolf is full of love and wisdom and kindness and strength and intuitive and wise and caring. And these two wolves are at war with each other. And the little boy looks up to his grandpa and says, well, Grandpa, which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, the wolf that you feed. And I love this story as it relates to this, because we can certainly spend a lot of time feeding the oily, mucky layer and looking for what's wrong with us and what's wrong with the world and what's wrong with everything, and adding in this limiting belief system and reinforcing it and choosing to believe what we believe without ever questioning it. Or we can take the choice to say, you know what? I'm not going there. I'm going to reinforce and honor my soul essence and who I really am and who I want to be and how I want to be, and reconnect with my authentic self and realign with what I want to create in the world. And when we do so, we bubble over with effervescence and joy and authenticity and our inspiring, capable, creative selves once again. And I love sharing this with you because it's really important for us to recognize that this part of us never went away, and it's never going to go away. We just need to take a deeper look. And one of the things that people do, and I should have shown this to you when the oil is still there, is they have the mistaken belief that all there is to their being is the oil and the glitter. They don't even realize that the sprite or the spirit is there. And so their ego starts to get pretty scared because it's attached to the oil and glitter as if it's all there is. And so when I start talking about peeling away that layer, and it thinks it's the only part of itself that matters, and that if I pull away that glitter, I'm going to dive into an oily, mucky mess of grief and sadness and pain and hurt, and the ego doesn't want that to happen, so it puts up its dukes and says, don't listen to her, don't listen to her. But it doesn't realize that underneath it, what it's really trying to protect is this beautiful treasure underneath. And when we know that, peeling away that oily, mucky layer reveals this part of our being. And then we connect heart to heart with other people, spirit to spirit, instead of oily muck to oily muck. And that's when real relationship happens, when we're able to connect from there. I'm going to end this with another story of the way that they go into a gold mine looking for gold. And it's kind of a funny thing to think about. When you go into a gold mine as a miner and you're looking for even just one single little nugget of gold, you have to remove tons and tons of dirt and rock to find that single nugget. But you never, as a miner, go into the gold mine looking for the dirt. You always go in looking for the gold. And I want to remind you and invite you to consider that as you go in to enhance your own self-esteem, or if you're working to enhance the self-esteem of your children or your students or your spouse or your family members and invite them to enhance their own self-esteem, that you will find dirt. You will find the oil, the muck, the ego. We all have it. But if you go in looking for that, that's pretty much all you'll see. And if you pull away the blinders and look for the gold within, look for the gold within yourself and the gold within others. Look for the God within, the divine presence, the soul essence, the sprite. If you go in looking for that, that's what you'll see. And as you look at that, that's what you'll grow. And as you grow that, you become powerful for creating the love and the joy and the happiness that you want to create.